Welcome to the State of Cybersecurity Today, 2015, brought to you by the Raytheon Cyber Products Group, Jackson & Lewis, and the SMLR Group. How to start. My name is Alan Heyman, and we believe there's a number of questions that senior management need to be asking about cybersecurity. The reasons for this are very obvious. An information security breach can have a direct impact on your organization. Cyber threats to your organization are becoming increasingly sophisticated and targeted. The information held on your networks can be pieced together by intruders for their economic or political gain. We put together 6 questions based upon our experience that you should discuss with your IT security team to review the position of your organization's security. First, are you confident that your networks are not currently compromised? I can't tell you how many times we work with people and they say, well, we're okay. How do you know that? In the security culture of your organization, a strength or a weakness? What steps are you taking to verify your company's security of confidential data, employee, customer, or client data? What are you doing now to comply with state and federal laws? And these are changing and evolving on a regular basis. So the utilization of your lawyer, privacy lawyer, is most significant. What would a serious cyber incident cost your organization? Very important to understand where and how this fits in, because as you can see in the target organization, costs are running exponentially. And unfortunately for smaller corporations, the ratio seems to be the same. Good information security is like an insurance policy. Good security can avoid direct costs of cleanup, but also indirect costs such as downtime, lost productivity, and loss of reputation and confidence in your organization. Reputation management is the most important factor. If records such as customer records, financial data, and intellectual properties were stolen, could you quickly and accurately determine what was lost? What if you had to take a system offline to conduct a forensic or legal investigation? One of the areas we suggest for clients is to do a mock cybersecurity attack and see how your organization responds. Excuse me. Next question, who would benefit from having access to your information? Everybody's information has a value. The question is to who? Your data is valuable. There are many state and non-state actors who would benefit from having access to your agency's information. Identify critical information. Identify the confidentiality, the integrity, and the availability of which is essential to the function of your organization. It's important to consider the aggregate value of your information, not only the value of individual records. Every organization faces different threats and security risks and needs to deal with them in different ways. What makes us secure against threats? Seems to be an easy question, but when you start asking the question, you'll be amazed at the answers. It's an ongoing process. It's not a product. As you'll learn today from the professionals, this becomes part of the culture of your organization. As cyber intrusions become more sophisticated and targeted, so do information security techniques and processes. To secure your organization against threats, make sure appropriate security governance, clearly defined policies, user education, third-party assessments are in place, as they are all vital parts of the information security. There's no silver bullet for information security, and security products alone are not a solution. Is the behavior of your staff enabling a strong security culture? We always ask this question because security becomes part of the fabric, the framework of your organization, and it always starts from the top down. Staff education is key. It only takes one malicious email attachment to be opened or one malicious website to be accessed to potentially compromise your whole business. Effectively trained staffs enable a strong security culture. Responsibility for information is shared amongst all members of your organization. So all staff should be aware of the threats to reduce the security risk of valued information that can be stolen. Are you ready to respond to a cybersecurity incident? To a great extent, this is just like a fire drill. It's very important to practice. Will a compromise affect your continuity? Sadly, many organizations generally do not take information security seriously until they have been compromised. Your systems can be taken offline by an attack, for example, through a denial of service attack, affecting the availability and resilience of your network. Having access to current threat information, including the likelihood and consequences, will enable informed risk assessments. Thank you. Those are the 6 basic questions we'd like to share with everybody. SMLR, we're an authorized Gold Channel partner of the Raytheon Cyber Products Group, and I'd like to now introduce you to Michael Krause, who is the Director of Insider Threats for Raytheon Cyber Products Groups.
Perfect. So before I get into the insider threat point of view, I just want to bring up a few things with respect to Raytheon and how we're going about our business, how we're going about protecting our network, and also protecting our internal, our internal programs, our internal data. Raytheon, it really evolved over the last 10 years from really kind of expanding our cybersecurity beyond protecting from external threats. We have spent an excruciating amount of money protecting external people that are trying to do damage against Raytheon. Raytheon is a very large global company and has a tremendous amount of information to protect. We've taken a defense in-depth strategy, kind of a layered strategy, which builds upon our successes of protecting against advanced threat protection, APTs, malware, as people are trying to take information out of our corporation. And where we've evolved to is we've kind of taken it, kind of a step further, and are now bringing in the insider threat program, kind of up a notch, where now we can look at both ends of the spectrum. We can look at a trusted individual who Raytheon has brought in to do a variety of tasking. We can look at those trusted individuals and ensure that they are doing the work that they've been assigned to. And what we can do is look at also external actors that have become internal actors. Maybe they've stolen a credential, how they've stolen the credentials. We have some advanced analytics as well that can take a variety of data and look at different tip-offs and look at indicators that can help build us a case, an insider threat case, or even a case against an external actor. So Raytheon's taken this in-depth approach, and it's becoming a very effective program that our company is very proud of. But for the sake of this presentation, I'm going to talk a little bit about how we're building our effective insider threat program within Raytheon, and how we've built it over the years, and how we've taken our knowledge for the last 15 years, and how we're bringing these to customers across the world. So with that said, I'm going to kind of go into a little bit more on our insider threat program. So the first thing I always bring up to organizations from an insider threat point of view is you have to understand the problem. You have to understand why people are looking and what they're looking for. If you look at a Forrester research just came out with something that said organizations, insiders account for more than 60% of data breaches. 60%, 60. That's tremendous. And that's tremendous from a fact of now you can begin quantifying the problem, because now you can begin seeing potential cases that are being discussed openly about the problem. And that's another point that people don't understand. Insider threat cases are new. Carnegie Mellon's been doing research for about the last 10 to 15 years. But if you look at what breaches have been made known to the public, there hasn't been a tremendous amount. You hear a lot about what's happening from, whether it's a Chinese hacker, whether a Russian hacker, or maybe it's a hacker trying to hack in a government system into a corporate situation. But what you don't hear a lot about is the compromises that happen in the inside. And I think that goes to what Alan says, it's a cultural thing. Because once you start discussing openly that you've had a trusted insider that has a data breach, committed anti-sabotage or fraud, now you're kind of exposing, I would like to say, your own warts. And that's tough for companies to do. That's very tough for companies to do. For the government, it's also very tough because government really does not want to expose potentially what a trusted insider and insider threat breach was, because that could expand to other vulnerabilities and it could give insight into maybe tools or techniques. So I think the problem, first thing, is to understand a problem. And you have cases like this one, where you're talking about sabotage from an insider, where you have a Navy individual who is sabotaging and damaging United States Navy computers from the inside. This person was a trusted insider. This person had a clearance. This person was a Navy contractor and was prosecuted and sentenced for damaging Navy computer systems. This wasn't an external attack. This was an internal attack. And throughout history, you have many of these cases that now are being understood that this was a trusted insider and a breach from an insider. So once you understand the problem, once you really get a grasp on what the problem is, what do you do about it? Do you stay with the status quo? Do you stay with the techniques that you've used in the past? You kind of look at the way you've been doing it and say, well, I've got it all covered. I don't need to change anything. And I think that's where a lot of people make a mistake. I think a lot of people just stay with the status quo. A lot of people just say, you know what, Mike, I have bought a lot of tools in the past. I've put a lot of processes in the past. I've done a lot of work from an insider threat point of view, or not a lot of work from an insider threat point of view. You know, I've built all this external protection tools. I can't afford another technology. I can't afford to change a process. And to me, that says you're staying with the status quo. And if you stay with the status quo, every day your risk is being elevated. Every day your risk is being elevated from the fact that you are susceptible to a significant breach by an insider. And I'm not talking about just theft. Theft is always the first thing that people think about. They're always thinking about, well, I'm trying to keep information from being taken from my company. But I think things like sabotage, fraud, waste, and abuse, violence in the workforce, all these type of things are different, what I call causes of insider threat, and they all should be identified as a potential risk to your corporation. So why aren't you auditing? We talked about it before. Is it a corporate culture? Do you not have the lack of the proper resources? It could not be maybe lack of resources, but it could also be the right type of resources. Because the type of resources that look for an insider threat breach could be different than a typical IT security resource. IT security resource is looking for vulnerabilities, is looking for the next piece of malware, is looking for the next piece of APT. Whereas a resource needed for an insider threat breach could be understanding what the behavior of an insider would be, understanding how the behavior of an insider is basically affecting your corporation. So it's not so much the resource, could be the type of resources. And it's new. It's new for us. People say it looks hard. People say, well, Mike, insider threat is hard. And I tell them it's not hard. If you put together a simplistic process, put together a process that is effective and works effectively, you will not be susceptible to the next hit. You will not be susceptible to the next noted. You will mitigate your risk. You will lower your risk. Is it 100% foolproof? No. But the idea is you need to mitigate the risk and lower the risk. So we talked a little bit about before. We're not talking rocket science. I think Alan actually mentioned that. We're talking about common sense. We're talking about common sense processes, common sense procedures, and common sense methodologies for protecting against an insider threat breach. Carnegie Mellon has a tremendous amount of research information. The CERT has there's a good book called The CERT Guide to Insider Threats. I actually have it. I've read it. It's a very good book to start understanding insider threats. On the web, there's a common sense guide that Carnegie Mellon provides free of cost. There's a lot of research from Forrester, Gardner, and a variety of other organizations, including Raytheon, that can help you figure out, type of methodologies to kind of give you some kind of quick guides in the way to moving forward with any kind of insider threat program. So this one I always thought was an interesting quote. Don't expect what you don't inspect. And think about that. I've had many customers that have come to me and said, Mike, I didn't know what I didn't know. And I was like, wow, that's an odd thing to say. They said, yeah. They said, once we began to inspect, once we began auditing, once we began monitoring, once we began to put in an effective insider threat program, we soon found out things. We soon began to understand our culture and how our employees are using our data. And it made them nervous. And it made them nervous. So you have to have the will to inspect. You have to have the culture. That requires a change in culture. Do not be scared. Do not fear changing the culture. You can do this responsibly. You can do this effectively to not only protect your information, protect the privacy of individuals. So how do you do it? So what is the step? So what we've done in the past is Raytheon's come up with, we have like a 9-step program to talks about building an effective insider threat program. And you could use these 9 steps for not only an effective insider threat program, but you could use it for building any kind of cyber program, whether it's an insider threat program, whether it's a cyber situational program. I think these are common sense steps that you can put together for any type of program. So I'm just going to quickly kind of blow this up here. So it starts with a little bit about the policies, procedures, processes, technical controls, training awareness, and risk management. Those are really big fluff words. And a lot of people say, wow, Mike, you know, those are words that we have in place for a lot of our programs. And it's true. So we're not trying to tell you to change anything with respect to how you build programs, but you have to have specific programs and specific policies, processes, controls, training awarenesses for your insider threat program. You have to discuss in your program whether you're talking about prevention or detection. You know, prevention is a great way to kind of, you know, in your training and awareness to employees, you know, to talk about different insider threat use cases to make them more aware so they can help you identify a problem before it becomes a problem. So there's a lot of things you can do from an insider threat program that's similar to the way you're building other programs in cyber. One of the things that we believe is an effective way for insider threat, and one we believe in 100%, is the ability to audit and monitor. Have an effective program in place. And what we mean by that is that we want to have an effective program that audits and monitors the user activity. We call it user activity monitoring, content-aware detection. Basically, the ability to look and to identify and audit and monitor an individual's activity. And we'll get a little more into that as we move forward. So I have these nice animated slides that now you can see that I was the only one. So auditing a program. We believe that's a catalyst, you know, for identifying a solution. You need one. You need to have an audit program. You need to talk to the people that have done it before. Talk to those guys. Talk to the Carnegie Mellons. Talk to the Raytheons. Talk to the SMLRs. Talk to the Jackson & Lewis. Talk to everybody who's done before. Look at the type of tools they're using. Maybe the type of tools they're using are correct for you. Maybe they're not. Maybe they have a tool that really wouldn't work in your environment. And then what do you do next? What now? You've got an effective program. You're auditing a program. What now? What's the next step? But it sometimes is not about the technology. So we talk a lot about technology. I'm a technologist. I talk a lot about technology. I talk a lot about tools. But for some people, it's just not a technology problem. They could solve a similar problem, similar auditing and monitoring problem, through other mechanisms, through having a solid foundation in place. Technology is a significant part of it, but technology, like Alan said, is not a silver bullet. You need to start with a solid foundation. You need to have the must-have. You need to establish an effective insider threat program. You need to have the business case, the staffing, the stakeholders, education's key, governance, document your activities, and then you select the tool, and then you begin to implement. So as our friend Michael Tice has said from Carnegie Mellon, hope is not a strategy when you're building an effective program. So how do you establish the program? We talked a little bit about it before, the building blocks of establishing an insider threat program. You have to have the top-down direction. When you're building an effective program, a program is not effective if the ground roots effort. You have to have the support of the C-level leadership to build an effective program. It has to be top-down driven. You have to establish a vision. You have to put someone in charge. I think one of the things that I've seen go wrong with a lot of insider threat programs and even cyber programs is you do not have a belly button. You do not have a point of contact. You don't have a person who could say, this is the direction based upon our vision and based upon leadership, we're going to move in these steps. If you don't have somebody in charge, there becomes a lot of finger pointing. A lot of people that are saying, well, I thought he was doing it. I thought they were doing it. You need to have someone in charge. You need to put someone in charge. Provide somebody as an insider threat program manager for your organization. That's one of the first key steps you should think about when building a program. And you could have different roles. When you detect and prevent, how do you respond? Who's handling incident response? Is HR handling incident response? Is security handling incident response? IT? For each problem, you should have a different way to respond to an incident. You should have a different incident response person. Maybe it's one hierarchy team that if it's an IT problem, you have an incident response through IT. That could be a cyber problem. If it's an HR problem, you'd have HR responding, and so forth down the line. But you have to have that clearly established, those roles and responsibilities. If you don't understand why you're implementing your auditing and monitoring, just stop. Just kind of stop right there. Kind of go back to the drawing board. What's your authority? What's your directive? What is their policy that allows you to establish an effective auditing and monitoring program? So why am I doing this? The justification. There's a tremendous amount of government executive orders. There's a tremendous amount of other commercial regulations coming down the pike. There's also different audit trail requirements for different markets and different industries that you need to look at and determine the why am I doing this. If you figure out the why, then you can figure out the other steps to effectively monitor and audit. Building a staff. So as we told before, you're not only building a staff for implementing a program, you're also building a staff to bring awareness to your employees. And that's key. You're not only training your operators or training your team, your program team, you also need to bring in training for other parts of your staff. You need to talk about different prevention techniques, potentially different responses to that. These individuals need to kind of be brought on. They could be a little different. The type of staff that for a cyber insider threat team, to me, combines technical IT understandings, but also maybe a counterintelligence, maybe a law enforcement, maybe behavioral scientist understanding. It's the blending of those skills. It's the people that have done it before and have seen it before. But the staff is a critical part of the process. So when we talked a little bit about stakeholders, who should be involved, who's going to be brought to the table? In my theory, you need to bring a lot of stakeholders to the table. And you need to engage with them early. We've seen in the past where, people have tried to put an effective program together, but they haven't told anybody. One of the funny stories I had with a client was they rolled out a technology, they rolled out an audit and monitoring technology, they rolled out a host-based technology. So they put an endpoint technology on everybody's computer. But what they failed to kind of realize, they didn't tell IT. They didn't tell IT what the program was about. So when there was any kind of problems, the first person that IT blamed was security. Because they said, well, look, security told us to roll out this security tool. We don't know what it did, but now our users are having significant problems. So, of course, the first one to be blamed is the security team because we have no visibility into the problem or into the technique or tools being developed or even rolled out. So what you really need to involve is you need to look at the team, and when I mean team, your stakeholders as a team. You need to bring in whether it's the union, whether it's CIO, the security group, the computer investigations, could be CND, the computer network defense team, the IT guy. It could be HR, could be legal. It could be other people that own data, the data owners. So you're not only just involving your traditional IT guys, but you're bringing all stakeholders together. Bring them to the table and bring them to the table early. You see there, counsel is a key point. Legal is a key point. Bring legal in. Legal will be your, what I call your sanity check. They'll be the people to ensure that you're not encroaching on people's privacy, and they'll people ensure that you're keeping within your compliance statements of your company. If you think there's an easy button, you're wrong. We're not Staples, no cyber program, no insider threat program. We don't have the easy button. If we had the easy button, I think a lot of companies out there would be kind of out of business. You wouldn't see all these cyber companies. You wouldn't see all these different companies popping up with behavioral analytics, statistical analytic companies. You wouldn't bring up any other companies that are interested in, for example, talking about their next active malware programs. We know this is not an easy problem. And we know this is there's not an easy button out there. Because guess what? Insider threat and cyber really is a combination of the art and the science. It's just one thing to understand building algorithms. If you go back to the engineering, my engineering background is that if somebody tells you of a problem, that you can develop code, you can develop an algorithm against that problem. You can do it pretty quickly because you can write your requirements document, you can determine how to test that algorithm based upon, the results, the inputs, the outputs, you can come up with your nice algorithm. But the problem is, who's coming up with that behavior? Who's coming up with the requirements? Who's coming up with the part that requires you to build that algorithm, to build that statistical analysis? So you really need to combine what I call the art, and the art could come from stakeholders. It could come from thought leaders. It could come from people that have understood the problem and seen use cases. These are people that are really trying to understand what the problem is, what the behavior of an insider is, what the behavior of an actor on the outside that has become an insider. And once you understand the behavior, you can develop the math around it. You can develop your algorithms. But that's a very tough problem. Is it insurmountable? No, it's not insurmountable. I believe there's a lot of people out there that are really kind of nailing this right down today. I think a lot of people are kind of solving this problem between art and science and math. Combining the behavioral scientists with the engineers and the programmers. But keep that in mind. Insider threat has not been around that long, or at least insider threat companies focused on solving the problem have not been around long. The insider threat problem has been around for centuries. But now people are actually taking an interest in how to solve the problem. So finding an insider threat. So there's a lot of, and I'm going to kind of blow this up here, because I think it's a lot of different things that on this slide and a lot of moving parts, which is always interesting. So if you look at the way Carnegie Mellon, this is kind of a diagram I kind of stole from them, understanding how technology enables and what we mean by technical observables. If you look at, there's a lot of precursors, what I call predisposition, unmet expectations, the act, and all that good stuff. There's a lot of things that draw into a technical observable. So, for example, you might have had an incident. Say you hired an employee, And you know what, by the way, I believe all employees from day one do not come in with the mindset to take information, commit IT sabotage, commit fraud against your company. I believe when you do your vetting process up front, I believe all employees are good employees when they start. Now, something happens sometimes to some employees, not all employees, but some employees, whether it's a change in financial stature, change in potentially different life events, getting divorced, could be that bankruptcy, pretty much could be their performance review, a bad performance review. It could be an external attribute that somehow changes the mindset of an individual. And that could be a precursor. That could be unmet expectation. That could be a predisposition that causes them to do an act. And the act is a technical observable, just like all these are technical observables. But the act causes the theft and the damage. The act causes the problem, the issue, causes it from being maybe a malicious to a non-malicious to a malicious act. But there's a lot of different technical observables that if you effectively audit and monitor, you could potentially identify those technical observables before the act, before the theft and the damage. It could be insider threat education and awareness for your employees. But you have to understand all the different kind of the technical observables that could feed into this engine. And if you understand the technical observables, you understand different aspects of what could affect people's behavior, you'll be better off to understand the act and then potentially the damage and risk based upon those acts. Everybody understands the Washington Post test. Everybody understands what the Washington Post, I don't want to be on the Washington Post. I don't want to be on the Washington Post for the properly monitoring, auditing people that kind of against different policy, or privacy issues. So that's where legal can help you. Legal can make sure you have the proper governance and oversight. So engage your legal counsel. Ensure that you have the proper authority and the policies in place. Identify basic abuses in your operation. Whatever products or other technologies, wherever you have in place, make sure you have the proper controls in place. Whether it's a policy control board to understand what you're going to audit, what you're going to monitor. Make sure that you can pass the Washington Post test, the sniff test. And that's a very effective part for governance and oversight. I think with all programs, you need to answer the basic questions: the who, what, when, where, how, why. Ask them. Ask before you put them. Don't assume anything. Assumptions are bad. Who owns the data? Who has access to the data? Who deploys tools? Where do they deploy them? When? How? So all these type of questions are great questions to ask up front. Because once you ask the questions, then you can document it. Then you can build a trail of why, your reasons, your compliance statement. So if you do get audited, your program gets audited, and people come down and ask you, why do you have this program in place? You can go, this is why we have it in place. We've asked all the questions. We went to all the data holders. We went to the stakeholders. We understand the problem. We have clear guidance. The who, what, when, how, why. Document is key. And then finally, as you can see, we can even get down to tools. So during all this conversation, I think we went through 7 or 8 building blocks. We never talked about technology. We never talked about buying anything. We talked about a lot of things that you could do up front before you even look at type of a tool. So we built the building blocks. We built the foundation. And when you're ready, you built your foundation, you built your building blocks, now you can select a tool. Now you can select a tool that fits your organization. And be a little creative, because there's a lot of tools out there and there's a lot of people that are rebranding themselves as insider threat, rebranding themselves as cyber situational awareness. Everybody seems to chase the market. Everybody seems to chase the dollars. I mean, everybody seems to say, hey, insider threat is becoming a big buzzword. Let's brand ourselves insider threat. Hey, cyber situational awareness has become a big buzzword. Let's brand ourselves cyber situational awareness, ATP. All these are buzzwords. So when you're looking at tools, looking at people that have done it, look at people that have operational knowledge. Look at people that can help you. Look at people that understand how to build an effective program. Look at technologies that provide answers, not more questions. Your technology today should not be deployed, and after it's deployed, all it gives you is information that leads you to more questions. That's not effective. That takes more resources, takes more money, takes more funding. And start small. You can increase your capabilities as your program matures. You don't have to go for, like everything up front. You don't have to buy every technology up front. You don't have to buy every tool up front. Look at it and go, you know what, I'm going to start small. I'm going to build my system from the ground up. I'm going to get all my techniques, all my process in place. I'm going to put together a proof of concept. I'm going to put together a pilot. I'm going to build my building blocks. I'm going to build. I'm going to move forward. So ensure that your program can sustain. It's good to increase your capabilities as you mature, as it gets ready for enterprise-ready capabilities. And one thing your tool should have is context. Any technology should have context. Context of the event, context of a person's intent. Because when you're talking about insider threat, this is where it's different a little bit from your traditional cyber problem. Insider threat is about an individual. It's about a person. It's about a person that you trust that has either did something malicious or non-malicious. Maybe they've made a mistake. Having the context of the information around that act and event will help you save good employees and quickly remediate and reduce a risk of the really malicious employees. So you need the context because we need user attribution. And one of the best ways to use user attribution is to put some effective monitoring on the endpoint. So keep that in mind as you go through your tool selection tips. So of course, with any program, you're going to have your naysayers. You're going to have your people that could go, you know what I mean? I don't think this is effective. I don't think this is a program that we want to put in place. It could be your IT guys because they could feel that you're threatening them, that, they've spent a lot of money in building their external defenses. So the idea is you have to work with the stakeholders. You have to be able to effectively tell them to say, hey, you can use any kind of our technology today, our tool, for your effort as well. We talked about an external actor who has made its way into your organization and is now stealing the credentials of an employee. That external actor, when they steal those credentials, to me, when they're on the inside, is an insider threat. They're now an insider threat. So the same program you're building to look at user attribution, you can look at potentially a piece of malware, a piece of APT that's working on the inside. Because that now is an insider threat who's compromised credentials of one of your trusted employees. So you think about it from an IT point of view, an IT defense, a network defense, it would be an effective tool to be able to understand what an actual user is doing and what a piece of code is doing. And I would believe your IT people would be very welcoming to that type of concept. We asked a little bit about putting a process in place for building a program. So when you implement it, an implementation plan, you kind of want to look at a couple things. You want to make sure you can do a lab installation. Any vendor out there should provide you, the ability to do an implementation plan. You see here, I say demand it. I would. I think when you're looking at different technologies or whatever, if you're using a vendor or even an internal resource, you should demand an implementation. You should be able to spell out how you're going to effectively roll out the program, how you're going to go from selection of a tool to implementation of the tool in the lab to a proof of concept to a pilot. And what are my time frames? What are my checks and balances? When do I involve the stakeholder? What am I doing with incident response? How am I putting in an effective incident response team? That could all be in your implementation plan. So demand it. Ask for it. Ask for the implementation plan. Ask for help. One of the ways you can even include in your implementation plan is a communication plan. We talked a little bit about one of the challenges is changing the culture of individuals, changing the culture of your company. We've had many challenges working with clients out there that when you go into a program, and a lot of it comes into it, they go, we do not monitor people's activities. That's against our culture. And to them, I say, well, that's good. And that culture might have been effective, 10 years ago. And we're not talking about Big Brother here. And I explained to them, I was like, look, if I'm an employee that works for a company, and I work for Raytheon. I am proud that Raytheon has an effective auditing and monitoring program established, as well as an effective cyber program for overall situational awareness. Because I'm glad that Raytheon is protecting my information. Raytheon is protecting my personal information, my HR information, my security information. They're protecting my client's information, my customer's information. I do not want anybody to, for example, take information out of the company that could harm us or harm me personally in any other way. So I'm proud that Raytheon has an effective. I don't consider it an attack on my privacy. I believe everybody should have an effective program in place. Ask your vendor a little bit about help test tools, training. We talked a little bit about training from a situational awareness. Or ask them because they might have an effective training that you could use internally at your company. In a placebo effect. I think this is kind of funny, the placebo effect, because get ready for blame. Remember what I talked to you a little bit about earlier on about the IT guys that, anytime that went wrong with the machine, they always blame the security guys and putting security tools on their computers that they don't know about. The problem is get ready for the blame. Whether it's blame from leadership, whether it's blame from other stakeholders, get ready. And it's okay. If you're prepared, if you've taken these steps, if you understand the problem, understand the risk, you'll be ready for the blame. You'll be ready to effectively tell them why we should have a program, why it's important to maintain a program. And finally, this is not a set it and forget it activity. Your program needs to be fluid. You need to continually improve your audit policies. You need to, for example, if there requires a change in your process, a change in your training, do not get set in your ways. Do not stay with the status quo. Just because you've established an effective program, you must continue to reevaluate the program, reevaluate your techniques, reevaluate your processes, reevaluate your procedures or training, reevaluate who your stakeholders are and what contribution you're making. Look across the board at your total program. Do it on a 6-month, maybe a quarterly, maybe 6 months, however frequent your organization believes. I believe you should do it at least twice a year, a biannual review of the program to make sure it's still effective. Because you don't want to have a non-effective program. It's kind of like having a non-effective technology. I don't like customers that, Raytheon's a technology company. And the last thing I want Raytheon customers to do is buy our technology and don't use it. It does us no good. First of all, we're not helping you. We're not solving a problem. Second of all, if I ask the customer for a reference customer and the customer is never using the technology or tool, then what's the purpose? You're wasting resources, you're wasting money. So make sure do not set it and forget it. Make sure you're looking at your technologies and your tools, your processes through the whole chain. So if you kind of take these steps, if you look at this business kind of staff it, you'll be prepared. You'll be better prepared than most. A lot of people out there are just coming late to the party. A lot of people really still are hesitant A lot of people don't believe that they have a problem, so they've kind of got their head in the sand. But if you're doing this now, if you're building your foundation now, you'll be better prepared than most. And this includes not only an insider threat program, but a cyber program. It's building the building blocks for an effective cyber program. It's combining technologies. It's building an in-depth, a defense in-depth program. You can take the same type of techniques, the same type of skills, the same type of plan, and apply it to any program, including an insider threat program, a cyber program, or any program. My name is Michael Krause, and I'm the Director for Insider Threat Strategies for Raytheon Cyber Company. If you have any questions or you need additional information on this, by all means, you can contact SMLR, Jackson Lewis, or anybody else on this webcast, and by all means, get in touch with me. Hopefully, at the end of this, you've learned something. You've gotten something out of this, something you can take back with you, something that you can help potentially share with other people in the community, that you can bring awareness to the problem and awareness to how you can maybe solve the problem in some simplistic steps. Into some steps that if you do it effectively, you'll reduce your risk and you'll be able to protect not only your information, but also protect your employees as well. So thanks again, and I will turn this back over to Alan.
Thank you very much, Michael. I'd like to introduce you to Joe Lazarati, who is the partner in charge of the privacy practice for the national organization Jackson & Lewis, and will give you the legal consideration, which is always a factor in all these things that we're putting together.
Okay, so good morning, everyone. I'm Joe Lazarati. I'm with Jackson Lewis in our Morristown, New Jersey office. Glad everyone was able to make it and brave the snow or is sitting in their office and listening in. I thought that was a great presentation by Michael. It's very helpful for me to get a good understanding of how Raytheon approaches some of the things and some of their technology. I think this is a real issue. I know for a lot of our clients, we hear in the news a lot, as was said by Michael and Alan, payment card breaches that make the news. Those are the popular ones, but there's a lot going on that doesn't get into the news, and it relates to how employees handle data to their own advantage sometimes, or thinking that they're protecting themselves, or they're trying to make money. There's all kinds of things that happen with employees who take liberties with the company's information systems, and there's a lot of technologies out there that can help to limit and prevent that. But like many things, those technologies used in the wrong way, used too far, or even used properly can create some practical and legal risks. Now this Dilbert Cartoon from May of 2014 kind of is a sign of the times. It talks about some of the sensitivities and capabilities in monitoring, although when he talks about what Dilbert is feeling at the time, it kind of gets a little scary, and maybe we're not there yet, maybe we are. But the point is that the workplace is not what it was years ago, and employers increasingly have tools available to them to help understand what's going on in their workforce. And there really are a lot of reasons why they would want to do that. Monitoring of communications, monitoring of location, monitoring of activity, these are all important things for a lot of good reasons. In some cases, it's required by law. People in the financial services industry know that they have to monitor certain communications in certain contexts and keep records of that and report those communications. Companies want to ensure compliance. They want to make sure that they're not violating regulation. They want to make sure that patient data, for example, is not being sent off outside the system or being used for an improper purpose or being accessed for an improper purpose. All of these things create additional obligations, so an effective monitoring system can help to prevent that. Obviously, they also want to try to make sure that employees are being productive. They're doing what they're supposed to be doing. The next few bullets really highlight the issue of the insider threat. Again, credit cards, Social Security numbers, All of these are the kinds of breaches that tend to be more in the news, but maintaining and protecting trade secrets, intellectual property, these are things that really create significant harm to the company. If anybody wants to get a copy of the slides, I'd be happy to share it. Here's the slide we were at, and kind of listing some of the reasons why we, as companies, need to monitor or want to monitor employees' organizations. There are concerns with, as I mentioned, trade secrets, preventing fraud, identity theft, concerns about cloud services, how things are hosted, detecting and dissuading from improper behavior, even if a company may want to take steps to ensure that employees aren't engaging in harassment, discrimination, or bullying. So there's a wide range of reasons why a company might want to monitor their organization. And that applies not only to employees, but it may be other users that are allowed to access the company's systems. Companies may have free Wi-Fi that they make available. They may have independent contractors or vendors that access the systems. And so there's a whole other set of reasons why a company may want to access and understand what's going on in their systems. The FBI is really given a lot of attention to this. They have a website dedicated to it, and they point out that, as is obvious, that the fact that someone has legitimate access makes it difficult. It makes it for companies and organizations a real chore to try to identify and handle these situations that come up. There are some examples that they put on their website. Some of these you may have heard about. Research scientists taking information, selling it off to China, employees stealing code and sending it off, selling it, disgruntled employees doing things that with their company's trade secrets and selling it to competitors. This is not an uncommon thing. If you even have sales employees who may take data when they want to move on to another company, they may take trade secret, lead information, customer information, and so on. You also get employees who want to take information to protect themselves from threat of litigation or to pursue litigation against the employer. There's a lot of reasons why employees may want to take information. The idea of the insider threat has been recognized, and this is just some quotes from a NPR program, and it talks about employees who may want to swipe information as well to get bank account information, electronic medical records. Medical record identity theft, for example, is the fastest growing area of identity theft, exceeding even credit card data. And with the Affordable Care Act, individuals buying individual coverage, medical records have a wide range of information that can be helpful to commit identity theft in the insurance business with medical information and getting medical services. So it's a growing area. And then the same presentation on NPR talked about technologies that are out there that enable the information system owner to identify and actually send a signal when it sees, and this is some of the things that I think Michael was talking about, where an employer or company can get a signal that says, hey, someone did something in real time that they probably shouldn't have done. And of course, to get to that point, a lot of the steps that Michael was talking about, the planning, the policies, the procedures, the involvement of the stakeholders to understand what are those things that might cause an individual or might indicate that an individual is about to do something, and have the system set so that it's able to identify and quickly in real time alert the company so that mitigation is a lot more easy to accomplish than if those steps weren't taken in advance to be able to identify those threats. So what we see really is that 93% of U.S. organizations polled believe that they are vulnerable, and that's pretty common. I mean, I think that's common sense, that the idea that employees in certain situations can really put a company at risk is really widespread. And taking that a step further, a Gartner study says that right now, only about 5% of companies are able to trace the movement of employees and users through their systems, and they expect that by 2018, it'll be 80%. And what's interesting about this kind of technology is, we're talking about the insider threat, But being able to monitor activities in an organization, being able to manage the human capital of that organization has other benefits. You start to look at the ways some of these technologies can be used when you talk about things like GPS and monitoring communications and steering projects and so on. It can make companies much more efficient, much more competitive. And so if you're not doing it just from an insider threat standpoint, adopting these kinds of technologies can help the company to become more competitive and do the services or provide the services that it provides in a much more efficient and profitable way. So my role is really, I think today, to kind of summarize some of the restrictions on the monitoring that we're talking about. I mean, and some of the technologies that we're seeing are quite intrusive if you look at it from one vantage point, but at the same time, they are able to gather a lot of helpful information. And when you look at the status of the law, in general, to some degree, a lot of this has been ruled by courts to be permissible. And when you, as a starting point, you look at what are the constitutional principles that have been applied. And from a constitutional standpoint, we're thinking about state action. What is the government unable to do in terms of intruding into our lives? And even in the case of public employees, what the courts have generally said is that it's a sense of reasonableness. The idea that you know, you have a policy that you distribute to employees, and that policy makes clear that the expectation of privacy of an employee is diminished, that you really have no expectation of privacy in terms of what you can do or save or send or receive on a computer or on the information systems of the employer. And in general, when you stop there, you say, well, that kind of makes sense. You may disagree with the policy. You may think that employees may not really be consenting to that. They may be forced into that consent. But the idea that they have notice, that they don't wind up making disclosures or put information on the company's systems that they don't want, they have that notice, and so if they do it, they're subject to the company seeing what it is that they put on the systems. But for the most part, companies have drafted policies and procedures to deal with this, but the technology has moved in many cases beyond that in terms of what the company can actually access, goes beyond sometimes their own systems. When you look at what employees access on the internet and what employers can see through the types of software that can monitor employees, things can get interesting. Take, for example, the Electronic Communications Privacy Act. And in short, without getting too into the woods on this, into the weeds, this statute prohibits intercepting communications. So, for example, if you were to set surreptitiously a person's Outlook account to send you an email every time they send an email, you get a copy of it, that's been held to be an improper interception. Kind of like wiretapping, where you tap onto the phone and can listen to the phone calls without the other persons to the conversation knowing you're there. This is the same kind of thing in the electronic format. And there's been a recognition of the service provider and consent exceptions, that if this goes on with employer communications using the employer's email, it's not a violation, it's not an interception if the employer is doing it. What happened in this case, for example, Chefs vs. Petrakis, this was a situation where owners of a company had some dealings and some concerns about one another, and one wound up applying spyware technology to be able to cause the emails that one of the other owners was saying to have a copy of that person's screenshots and those communications and emails sent to a remote location. And because that happens just about simultaneously with actually sending the communication, the court found that that violated the Electronic Communications Privacy Act. And so so the idea of trying to monitor those communications in that way, with it not being maintained on the systems of the company, wound up creating a problem under the Electronic Communications Privacy Act. In a similar way, kind of as a part of the ECPA, is the Stored Communications Act, and this deals with communications that are stored, generally for backup. And it also has a service provider and consent exception, which is why employers can look at stored communications on the company's own systems. And the courts have recognized that generally. In Frazier was a case where the employer wanted to access an independent contractor who really was an employee, wanted to access the employee's stored communications on its systems. And the court held that they could. But in a different case, a more recent case in the Southern District, a case called Pure Power Boot Camp versus Warrior Fitness Boot Camp, the employer's policy really didn't reach what the employer was trying to monitor. In that case, which is somewhat typical in terms of non-compete situations, a company hired a couple of former military persons to set up a military-style boot camp workout regimen for their company. And they signed a non-compete, but these two folks wound up using their time working for the company to set up their own company. And they used personal web-based email accounts to do that, but they accessed those personal web-based email accounts through their employer's system. And when they left, the employer went in and was able to, because they set up, the two employees that left set up their account to automatically sign on, the owner was able to see all of these communications. But these communications weren't saved on the employer's system. They were saved on the personal web-based account that the employer had access to, because the employer went onto the computer and actually was able to see it. The company's policy in that case was really limited to what was on the company's equipment. It's a question whether or not the court would have ruled differently if the policy had read web-based email accounts as well. And we'll get to some developments that may impact that. But the policy was drafted only to apply to the equipment of the company. And by virtue of the fact that those emails were stored on unrelated server, that company was found to violate the Stored Communications Act. And so this idea of being able to look and see what was being communicated, but because it was stored somewhere else, you run into some problems. Switching gears a little bit, there was a recent decision called In Re Purple Communications, and that arises out of whether employees can use the company's email systems to engage in what's called protected concerted activity. And if you're not familiar with that term, it basically means, and I'll defer to my labor partners who are much more steeped in this than I am, but it involves a company, rather an employee wanting to reach out to other employees to talk about working conditions, and that under the National Labor Relations Act, that activity is protected. And by the way, it applies really to any company. You don't have to have a unionized workforce for this principle to apply. So that when companies say things like, you're not permitted to disclose company confidential information, or you're not permitted to disparage the company in public, or on the internet, or on social media, those prescriptions are impermissible in the eyes of the National Labor Relations Board, and cases have held that to be the case because those are too broad. They chill protected speech under the NLRA. So when you get to In Re Purple Communications, there's some prior cases where the employees had wanted to be able to use and didn't want to be disciplined for using the company's email systems to engage in this kind of activity. And what this case basically held was that employees during off can use the employer's systems to engage in this kind of activity. And the concern came up, well, if we have a robust monitoring program, will this somehow cause a problem in regard to chilling protected speech? So if employees become aware that their communications using the company's systems, even if off-duty, which is protected under the holding in Re Purple Communications, would that somehow give an employee the ability to argue that regardless, the employer is still violating the National Labor Relations Act because this robust monitoring is chilling their protected speech? They feel that because there's such intense monitoring and the employer is watching all of these communications, they really can't speak freely and exercise their rights using the employer's system during off-duty. And the court kind of thought that through in terms of, a little bit anyway, in terms of saying, well, we've long held that this kind of, that monitoring is going to be okay as long as the employer does nothing that's out of the ordinary. But they really didn't define what that meant, except to say that if you start monitoring during organizing activities, or if you focus your monitoring on certain persons, that might create a problem under the NLRA. The dissenting opinions, though, disagree and suggest that, in fact, there may be some risk to how you monitor. But again, going back to some of the things that Michael was talking about in terms of how do you set up this program, how do you understand how to identify these insider threats and react to them, getting the right people in the room, understanding how to engage in monitoring will help to minimize the potential risks that this type of prescription will impose on the company. There are also some other restrictions. For example, in Connecticut and Delaware, there is a specific notice requirement beyond just giving employees a handbook policy. The Connecticut statute, for example, states that you have to post the notice. Whether that will be interpreted to be that a handbook policy will be sufficient, it's unclear. But in those two states anyway, if you're going to monitor employees engaged in electronic activity, they need to be notified specifically. And that's really good practice, although how you carry out that notice can take many forms. For example, when an employee signs on to work at the beginning of the day, a pop-up that gives them language explaining what the company's monitoring policy is, something that they have to click to accept, would be one way of doing that. Some companies might have a dashboard where when they sign on, they'll see a whole bunch of information about their day, about the company, announcements, and so on, and this could be one of those pieces of information that they get every day. There's also states that have common law protections. This idea of intruding upon one's seclusion. It's one of the 4 common law privacy protections that have evolved in our system. And not all states recognize it. Most do. It's a less likely cause of action that the company might expect, particularly if they're engaging in typical monitoring that we're used to. It's when I think you get into some of the more intrusive areas of monitoring, like where you're looking at an employee's personal email accounts, or you're monitoring through GPS where they've been driving during off-duty hours. So you can begin to use technology in a way that might be very beneficial in one respect, but could give an employee the ability to claim that you're really going too far. And understanding where that line is can sometimes be difficult. There's also been a development over the last few years about employees' online activities, in particular social media, where states have passed laws saying that a company can't request or require an employee to turn over their password or username to their social media account or their online account. The structure of the laws is fairly similar, but there are some nuances in terms of whether it's social media, whether it's online account. But the bottom line is that there's this rule that if you ask for a social media password, you may run afoul of the law. New Jersey has a statute, and you see the states there that are listed. One of the interesting things in technology that may create an issue is being able to effectively bypass that. And the question is whether that's really, whether that will wind up violating the law. For example, if you have spyware technology employed on your systems that allows you to take screenshots of what an employee is looking at, or even a video of what an employee is looking at on your computer, you might see that they're on Facebook. You might see that they're texting or posting something on Facebook or their personal web-based email account. And you might have all the content that you want or that you can acquire if you had gotten their password and their username. And so the question is, will that effectively violate these statutes? Even though you haven't asked for it, even though you haven't acquired it, you have it. And using these types of technologies may give an employee a cause of action saying that effectively you asked for it and did so in violation of these statutes. So there's no case on this yet. These statutes are relatively new, but it really is a risk, and it highlights, I think, an example of how monitoring, which may otherwise be permissible, given the types of policies and procedures that we are used to seeing, but how it's applied and what kind of information you're getting and from what source may actually be a potential risk. So some of the other considerations beyond just the legal ones that I think might be important to talk about are, you know, this idea of balancing privacy and security and the risks of doing nothing. And oftentimes we talk to clients about this, not only in the context of monitoring, but in the context of doing anything. I mean, even we talk about whether a company wants to institute a wellness program, for example, to employees. It sounds like a great idea. You want your employees to be healthy, you want to provide them some tools to do it. Seems like it's a great idea, but there's a lot of risks in terms of what kind of information you're gathering. Do you comply with the Affordable Care Act? But at the same time, not doing anything continues to, if you have a workforce that has maybe less healthy on average than others, it continues to allow those risks to mount. And you weigh those things and say, well, we're willing to take those risks because we think doing nothing is worse in the long run. And in this case, doing nothing seems to be worse in the long run. And so you need to balance privacy and security because it can be problematic. Then we want to think about, do we have the right team and the right resources? I think Michael touched upon this, and I think it's critical to really go through those steps, many of which he laid out. And that is, you know, it really isn't and shouldn't be just one person in the company that is the person who will drive this process. It really requires an enterprise approach. It really requires thinking about the people that need to be in the room to understand the different impacts on the organization. And then also understanding, are those the right people? Frequently, when I will help a client through a breach response, one that involves some need for forensic investigation, the client usually wants to call in their IT folks. And this makes a lot of sense to want to do that. But one of the issues is that typically the in-house counsel isn't aware of whether the in-house people who do IT have the requisite forensic experience to get the information that we really need to make decisions. And in some cases are even reluctant to go outside. So as you're going through this, it's important to think about, you know, not only are we getting the right team in place, but are they capable? Do we have the right resources to give them what they need to carry out their functions? So that's an important item. The other thing that I want to talk about is this idea that, you know, from the movie Forrest Gump, you know, life is like a box of chocolates. You don't know what you're going to get. And I think this is a real issue that gets into the kind of planning that's needed and the considerations that have to be taken into account if you're going to engage in this kind of program, because there can be information that you're going to get which you may not want to have. The first one is rather obvious. If you wind up getting medical information of employees that you really didn't expect to get, it creates risks. It creates risks under the ADA. Employee may say, well, you got all kinds of information about me by monitoring my personal emails, and you should have taken steps to try to accommodate it. Or the reason that you took adverse action from me wasn't because of my performance. It was because you regarded me as disabled based upon the information that you obtained. Additionally, similar types of claims can come from GINA. GINA is a statute that prohibits employers from collecting genetic information, which includes the manifestation of disease in family members. Emailing with his spouse or her spouse about a particular health issue they're going through, that may raise GINA issues. For healthcare providers and for companies with self-funded health plans in particular, there are HIPAA issues. So this idea of what kind of information are we going to get can present a risk. We also see that sometimes employees will communicate with their attorneys. Most cases that have looked at this have said that if there's a clear policy in place where the employee was aware of the kind of monitoring that can go on, the employee would have effectively waived the attorney-client privilege. In New Jersey, however, that's not the case. Even if there's a policy, even if the policy is clear, the attorney-client privilege is recognized as overcoming the employee's consent and still applying. And so you really need to be careful when you find through monitoring that an employee is communicating with their counsel. Personal communications as well. We talked about how far do you go with monitoring an employee when you know that those communications are personal. Again, drawing that line can sometimes be difficult. We talked about Section 7 communications. That is, those communications that are protected under the National Labor Relations Act, where employees engage in protected concerted activity, designing when to monitor, who to monitor, how far to go in monitoring. That can raise issues under the NLRA. Highly sensitive information. The people who monitor may not be people who ought to be privy to certain company information. And when you in IT with high levels of access inside a company, they may become privy to that kind of information. And so you need to think about the persons who are going to allow to engage in monitoring and to capture information. Are those the people that we really want to have the ability to access highly sensitive company information? Or how are we going to set up some kind of back channel that's not monitored, perhaps if that's something or an approach you want to take, to still have those kind of communications while allowing our monitoring program to continue as is. I mentioned also child pornography because it's about, this does happen, unfortunately. There's a number of states that require notification at the federal and state level when that information is found on a system. So it's something that ought to be part of your program and ought to be part of the implementation so that persons in the company are aware of that requirement. And the last thing I wanted to get through was some of these questions which kind of bring out some of the things that we've been talking about already, some of what Michael has been talking about, this idea of really planning and getting ready before deploying some kind of a system to monitor employees on your information systems. You really need to decide who and what gets monitored and when. The question of why are we doing this is really critical. Those reasons will determine the direction you take and will determine in part or in whole many of the following questions. Because if what you're trying to do is focus solely on, look, we just want to make sure that our patients' data, if you're a large hospital system, for example, our patients' data is not being accessed or disclosed improperly. You may find ways to limit your monitoring so that you're only really dealing with those situations. Who decides? Who's going to be the person charged with determining when do we monitor, how do we monitor, what is the extent of monitoring, when do we have a problem, when should we stop? The person who has that role or the committee that has that role really ought to have thought through these issues a lot. They ought to have access to counsel. They ought to understand the company and its clients and its institutional history so that they can make decisions that are in the best interest of the company. Who performs the monitoring? We talked about that a little bit. You want to think about, do those persons have the appropriate judgment to stop monitoring when it's personal, for example, or to get access to information that is sensitive information to the company and that they'll handle appropriately? Are these people trusted people who can understand what the importance is of making sure information is not further disclosed and can hurt the company? Who can access what is monitored? Often monitoring takes place, there's a record created of that activity. And, do you want to have a group of people in the entire IT department being able to access that? Probably not. So you want to think about, if you monitor, if you keep records of the monitoring, well, who's going to be able to access it? And who monitors the monitor? It's important to evaluate, to assess, to understand what monitors are doing, how they're doing their job, how how far they're going, who they're monitoring, are there any patterns to that kind of activity that creates risk? Are they focusing only on certain employees as opposed to other employees? There's a role here for understanding and having in place protections to make sure that the activity that may otherwise be permissible, there's a process for stopping it from crossing the line. And then, of course, a company may find something. A company may be engaged in this kind of activity and learn of an employee talking to another company, and where it looks like the employee might be sharing information, or it looks like somebody's downloading patient data or credit card information, or it looks like the company is, the individual is taking company trade secrets. You need to have a plan in place at that point. You need to understand, how are we going to investigate that? Do we need an outside third party to help us do that investigation surreptitiously? What if it's a data incident? And that's where your data incident plan will kind of pop up, and you need to be prepared to implement it and determine, how do we act, how do we find out more, where do we go from here? So the idea of monitoring isn't as simple as installing some kind of a technology that will allow you to see what employees are saying. It really requires a lot of thought that goes into, how do we minimize our legal risk while maximizing the purposes for which we wanted to engage in this kind of activity. So I'm going to turn it back over to Alan now. Thank you so much.
Mike, Joe, thank you very much. Appreciate your expert input. I've even learned a few things. Thank you very much.